John Hawkins had lived alone for many years in the Arizona desert. His small cabin, tucked away in the rough landscape, was the only place he could call home. It was a simple structure, made of wood and stone, weathered by time and the harsh elements. A place that seemed to blend into the dry, dusty earth around it. John, now in his early 52s, had never imagined that he would end up living such a solitary life. Yet, here he was, day after day, surrounded only by the vast emptiness of the desert. Before his wife, Sarah, had passed away, John had never been truly alone. They had built the cabin together, planting gardens, and discussing the future in front of their fireplace at night. But everything changed when Sarah got sick. The illness took her quickly, and John was left with nothing but memories. At first, he tried to reach out to friends and family, but it wasn't enough. The pain of losing Sarah was too great, and so he withdrew from everyone. The cabin, which had once been a home full of laughter and love, became a prison of grief. John couldn't bear to stay in the town where they had lived. It was filled with people who reminded him of her. So, he retreated to the desert, far away from the city, to find the solitude he so desperately needed. The desert, with its wide open spaces and empty silence, seemed to offer the kind of peace that John craved. The endless stretches of sand, the towering cacti, and the dry winds were the only company he had. For years, the desert became his world. John followed a routine that had become almost like a ritual. He woke up early every morning, just before the first light of dawn, to start his day. He would collect firewood from the surrounding area, chop it, and stack it carefully by the cabin. He took pride in the small garden he had planted, although the desert's dry conditions made it difficult. He watered the plants every day, even if he had to haul the water from a well that was a mile away. His only real connection to the outside world was an old radio he had found in the cabin when he first arrived. It wasn't much, but it picked up weak signals from the town. Sometimes he would hear snippets of music or brief conversations from the people he used to know. But the static and poor reception made the radio feel more like a distant memory than a real link to the outside world. It served as a reminder of the life he had once had, a life that now seemed so far removed from his own. As time passed, the days blended into one another. John had become accustomed to the quiet of the desert. He no longer felt lonely in the way he had at first. Instead, the solitude had grown comfortable. He had learned to rely on himself, to find peace in the simplicity of his life. The absence of other people was no longer a burden, but a relief. Though he had stopped searching for answers, his mind sometimes wandered back to the stories his grandfather had told him when he was a boy. His grandfather had been full of tales about the Apache people and their deep connection to the land. John remembered how his grandfather would speak of their strength and wisdom, how they had learned to survive in the harshest conditions, using the desert not as an enemy, but as a part of themselves. These stories had always fascinated him, but as he grew older, he had stopped thinking about them. Now, living in the desert, he couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth to those tales. It wasn't that John believed in all the stories he had heard, but there was something about the desert that made him wonder if there was more to life than what he had experienced. Perhaps, he thought, the desert held secrets that he wasn't yet ready to understand. Still, the days continued to pass in much the same way. The weather was dry, the sun relentless. John had become used to the heat, the dryness, and the silence. Sometimes, he would stand outside his cabin at night, looking up at the stars, feeling as if he were the only person in the world. And in many ways, that was true. One particularly hot summer afternoon, John noticed something strange. For the past few days, the sky had been cloudless, and the heat had been nearly unbearable. But when he went to draw water from his well, something was wrong. The usual sound of water trickling up from the depths of the earth was absent. Instead, he heard nothing. Confused, he dropped the bucket back down, hoping that it was just a fluke. But when he pulled it up again, it was empty. John cursed under his breath. The well had always been reliable. He had lived off it for years, and it had never run dry. He knelt down beside it, peering into the dark hole, hoping to see some sign that the water was still there. But all he could see was a dry, cracked bottom. He knew what this meant. Without water, he wouldn't be able to survive in the desert for long. For a moment, panic began to rise in his chest. The desert was unforgiving, and without water, there was no way to stay. John had no choice but to make the long trip to the nearest town for supplies. It was a trip he had made before, but this time, it felt different. The thought of leaving his cabin and walking for miles in the heat made his stomach tighten. It had been years since he had interacted with anyone, and the idea of seeing people again filled him with dread. Still, he knew he had no other option. He packed up his small bag, took his empty water containers, and set off. The walk was exhausting, but John pushed through. The sun beat down on him, and the air seemed to shimmer with heat. As he walked, he thought about how much had changed since he first arrived in the desert. He hadn't expected to be here for so long, but now, it felt like this was his home. The thought of returning to the town, of seeing faces that no longer held any meaning for him, made him feel uncomfortable. The people there had moved on with their lives, while he had stayed behind, lost in the past. The journey to town took hours. But eventually, John reached the small, sleepy community. He walked into the local store, greeted by the dusty shelves and the familiar, musty smell of old wood. The store owner, a man named Bill, looked up from behind the counter and smiled. "Well, look who's back," Bill said, his voice friendly but distant. It was clear that John's visits were rare. John nodded in acknowledgement, feeling the awkwardness of the moment. He placed the water containers on the counter and handed Bill the money. There were no small talk or questions, just a brief exchange. John didn't feel like engaging in any more conversation. He didn't need to. He had his water, and now he could go back to his cabin. As John made his way back into the desert, carrying the heavy water containers, he thought about the strange feeling that had washed over him in the town. He had been gone for so long that it almost felt like he didn't belong anymore. The desert had become his world, and it was where he felt most at peace. But that peace was about to be disturbed in a way he never could have imagined. As John trudged back across the desert with his water containers in hand, the familiar landscape stretched endlessly before him. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the sand, and the cool evening breeze was a welcome relief from the relentless heat of the day. John had walked this path countless times, yet today felt different. There was a strange stillness in the air, almost as if the desert itself was holding its breath. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something was off. As he neared his cabin, he noticed two figures in the distance. At first, he thought they might be mirages. The desert played tricks on the eyes, especially at sunset when the colors of the sky and sand blurred together. But as they grew closer, John realized they were real two women, walking toward him across the arid land. John stopped in his tracks, feeling a rush of surprise and confusion. It had been years since he had seen another person out here in the desert, and he certainly wasn't expecting visitors. The two women were tall, their dark hair braided neatly down their backs, and they were dressed in traditional clothing that spoke of a rich heritage he didn't fully understand. Their presence was striking, like a living reminder of the past, of the people who had once thrived in this very land. The women looked like they belonged to the Apache tribe, a people John had heard about in stories passed down from his grandfather. But the stories always spoke of warriors, hunters, and skilled craftsmen, not strangers who would appear so unexpectedly in the middle of nowhere. As they came closer, John could see that they were tired, their skin darkened by the harsh sun, their faces drawn from days of travel. Despite their exhaustion, there was a quiet strength in their demeanor, a calm determination that made them stand out in the vast emptiness of the desert. "Excuse me," the taller of the two women called out. Her voice was strong but tinged with weariness. "We've been traveling for days. Could you spare some water? We've run out." John stood there, frozen for a moment, not sure what to say. He wasn't used to interacting with strangers, especially not out here in the desert. He had always prided himself on his solitude, and the idea of offering help to these two women seemed foreign to him. But then again, he knew what it was like to be desperate in the desert. The unforgiving landscape didn't show mercy, and a lack of water could mean the difference between life and death. Without a word, John gestured toward the cabin. "Come," he said simply, his voice gruff from the years of solitude. He led them to the small well beside his cabin, the one that had run dry just days before. The women didn't question him, they simply followed, their steps slow but steady. As they reached the well, John felt a pang of worry. The well had been his lifeline for so long, and now, seeing these strangers relying on it, he wondered if he would even be able to help them. But when he lowered the bucket into the well, there was a satisfying splash. Water. It was only a little, but enough to fill a small container. The two women's faces lit up with relief. "Thank you," the taller woman said, her voice softer now. "We didn't know how much further we could go without water." John didn't say anything at first. He simply filled their containers and handed them over. His mind was racing, trying to understand the situation. These women didn't look like they were lost or in danger. They seemed strong, capable, but still, there was something vulnerable in their eyes, a weariness that spoke of more than just physical exhaustion. As they drank, John noticed that they were both looking around, taking in the surroundings. His cabin, though humble and weathered, seemed to catch their attention. It was a small, simple structure, but it was all John had. It had become his refuge from the world, a place where he could shut out everything that had happened in the past. But now, with these two women standing in front of him, his solitude felt less like a choice and more like an obligation. "We've been on the move for weeks," the shorter woman, Maya, said as she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Our people. We were forced out of our land. We're trying to find a place where we can settle again, somewhere safe." John nodded, though he didn't fully understand their situation. He had heard stories of the Apache people and their struggles with outsiders, but he hadn't ever met anyone from their tribe. The way Maya spoke about being forced from their land, it reminded him of the way he had been forced to leave the town after Sarah's death. It wasn't exactly the same, but there was a shared sense of loss, of displacement. The desert had taken so much from him, and now, it seemed, it was taking from them as well. "We can help," Tasha, the taller woman, said suddenly. Her eyes met John's, steady and unflinching. "We can teach you how to find food, how to survive in this place. You've lived here for a while, but the desert holds many secrets. It can be a harsh place if you don't understand it." John looked at her, unsure what to say. He wasn't used to people offering help. Over the years, he had come to believe that survival was something that had to be done alone. But these women seemed different. They had a knowledge, a connection to the land that John had never fully grasped. "I've managed," John replied, though there was doubt in his voice. He had survived, yes, but it had been a struggle. Every day had been about making it through, and now, with the well running dry, he knew he wasn't as self-sufficient as he liked to think. "We can show you how to live with the desert. Not just in it," Maya said. Her voice was gentle, but there was a certainty in it that John couldn't ignore. John stood silent for a moment, weighing the offer. He had always been a man who preferred his own company. But there was something about these women that made him hesitate. Perhaps it was the shared bond of living in such a harsh place, or perhaps it was the recognition in their eyes, the understanding that they too had known hardship. Whatever it was, John felt a strange sense of responsibility toward them. After a long pause, he nodded. "All right," he said simply. You can stay for a while. We'll see what we can learn from each other." The sisters smiled, and for the first time in years, John felt something stir inside him. A spark of hope, of connection. The desert, which had once been a place of isolation, suddenly felt a little less empty. As the sun dipped lower and the sky turned pink and gold, the three of them stood there together. The wind blew gently, carrying with it the scent of the desert, dry, warm, and ancient. It was a reminder that no one truly survives alone. That even in the harshest of landscapes, there could be moments of understanding and companionship. That night, John invited Tasha and Maya into his cabin. They shared a simple meal, the silence between them not uncomfortable but familiar. They talked little, but the unspoken understanding between them was enough. The desert had brought them together, and it was in this shared solitude that they would find a new kind of family. One forged not through blood, but through mutual respect and survival. In the days that followed, John found himself looking at the desert with new eyes. The land was no longer just a place to endure. It was a place to learn from, to appreciate, and, most importantly, to share. The Apache sisters had opened his eyes to the deeper rhythms of the desert, and with their guidance, John began to see the beauty in the harshness. The desert, with its endless stretches of sand and quiet winds, no longer felt like a prison. Instead, it became a place of possibility. And for the first time in years, John began to feel a sense of peace that wasn't born from solitude, but from the shared strength of those who walked beside him.